Okay, we're going to get started. It's 2 after the hour. And welcome to the Using Xojo to Develop NetSuite iOS Apps. I'm Jeff Perlman. I am the CEO and founder of Xojo. I'm here with Tim Dietrich, who is both a Xojo developer and a NetSuite expert extraordinaire. And he's going to be showing off doing development of iOS apps that connect to NetSuite. If you have questions, use the Q&A panel to enter them, and we will, if they're, we'll probably save some for the end, but if they're related to what he's talking about, what Tim's talking about, we may stop and I'll ask him those questions, and then we'll put the answers in the Q&A panel. And with that said, welcome, and Tim, take it away.
All right, let's see if I can share my screen. I think,
Oh, am I gonna need to, well, you try to share. I think I may have to stop sharing for you to share.
yeah, I think you do.
Okay, 1 second. There we go.
Right. All right. Probably screw this up. All right. You should be seeing the keynote.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So as Jeff said, this is our using Xojo to develop NetSuite iOS apps webinar. This is actually the second webinar that we've done in this series. About a month ago, we did a very similar webinar that showed how to develop NetSuite Android apps. We thought that by showing how to develop iOS apps, you could start to really see one of the big benefits of Xojo, which is that if you use it to develop one type of app, then developing a similar app rather with Xojo is pretty easy. I think especially you're going to find that between iOS and Android, there are some differences, but not a lot. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about our next webinar, which will be on developing web apps with Xojo. So just a little bit about me. I develop custom software for businesses that run on NetSuite. And again, that's everything from mobile apps, desktop apps, web apps, you name it. Also do a lot of native NetSuite work, but honestly, most of the work I do these days is developing apps that are external to NetSuite and that just integrate nicely with it. The fact that I develop all those different types of apps is, one of the reasons that I am able to do that is that I use Xojo. So I started using NetSuite in 2017 and started using Xojo a few years prior to that, back in 2014. I'm on my own. I'm independent. Basically, do everything on a contract basis. I'm not working for a firm or anything like that. I'm based out of Richmond, Virginia. And if you want to learn more about me and what I do, just go to timdietrich.me. That's my website. And so the goals of this webinar are to kind of give you a quick overview of Xojo, which I think we're kind of doing already, just in terms of like what it is. But I'm going to show you the IDE and show you the project and all that good stuff. I want to show you how you can use Xojo to basically develop an app, an iOS app that connects to NetSuite. And I'll show you in a minute what that app is. And again, the process is very similar to developing an Android app. And so if you attended the previous webinar, I think you'll see a lot of overlap here. I've deliberately made it a little bit different to make it interesting. But mostly, I hope your takeaway is that, if I know how to develop an Android app with Xojo, then I kind of already know how to do an iOS app. And I think when you see the web app that we build in the next webinar, you'll probably feel the same way. So, but I think out of all that, my biggest goal with this webinar is to kind of encourage you to try Xojo, download it, and play with it, play with the project file that we'll make available after the webinar, and learn about it, and then try building your own apps and see what you can come up with. All right, so the first demo is the iOS app itself. I'm just going to jump over to Xojo. I've got the project already loaded. I'm going to come back and explain what you're seeing here, but I really just want to run it and show you what we're looking at, like what the app does. So I'm going to click the run button. what you're going to see is that the app's going to load in the iOS simulator, which is part of Xcode. We'll talk about that in a moment too. But there's the app. It's very basic and deliberately so. The idea is that you can come in here and search, by keyword, and it'll show you the products that are in the NetSuite instance that I'm integrating with. So this is an instance that has some not so great product information in it, but it has some, and I'm just going to type the word bike because I know there's a couple products that have to do with that. At least I think there are. Maybe it's mountain. Can't remember. Oh, there it is. So you can see it brought up one item, the bike tire. If I search for, I think it's terrain is a good word. You can see it brought back two results. And if I click on one of those products, it'll show you some information, some more detailed information about the product. Again, I don't have a lot of good information in the NetSuite instance that I'm playing with, but I just wanted to show you that you can get more detailed information here, and you can see that this is a special order item. Talk about that in a moment too. So if I click the back button, I go back to the list view, and what you're seeing here is me hitting NetSuite in real time. So like the speed that you're seeing here. So if I go back and type frame as a keyword, it's getting that data from NetSuite in real time. And every once in a while, I've noticed that the instance that I'm hitting, which is out of the new Phoenix data center, I think, it can be slow responding at times, but most of the time it's extremely fast. So,
Hey, Tim, Edwin, who's a Xojo developer, is asking, he's not super familiar with NetSuite, and he's wondering what's the benefit of using NetSuite as opposed to AWS?
okay, so I guess my assumption was that everybody on here kind of knew what NetSuite was, but that's a great question. So NetSuite is actually an ERP. Just think of it as a business system, cloud-based, that provides businesses with just about everything you can imagine that they might need to run an operation. Everything from inventory management, order processing, CRM capabilities, and everything all the way to the end that you can imagine, like accounting. So and I'll talk a little bit more about NetSuite in a moment. So it's kind of comparing apples and oranges if you're thinking of NetSuite versus AWS. NetSuite is a business system, that a lot of businesses are using. It's very popular because it's cloud-based and because it can be customized. So, and there's a lot of different flavors of it, which makes developing both interesting and challenging. So hopefully I've answered that question.
So NetSuite is really an application layer, and that could be it comes from Oracle, so they're going to run it on Oracle and they're going to run it in their own data centers. But it's
Mhm.
something that is an application, so it could be hosted on AWS. I mean, you can't choose where to host it, but it is an application layer.
It's actually software as a service. I don't
Yeah,
think
there you
that
go.
you can do on-prem, like host it yourself on premise anymore. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think anybody is or even can at this point. All of the NetSuite servers, I believe at this point, have been moved to Oracle's OCI, which is kind of their equivalent to AWS.
Yeah, that's what I was
Um,
getting at, was to
yeah,
distinguish where NetSuite falls in the product chain, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So, and it's just sort of an aside, one of the things that I discovered last year is that we are able to use Xojo to develop applications that do run on Oracle servers, which is interesting. It doesn't really have anything to do with NetSuite, and maybe we'll talk more about that in the future, but it opens up a lot of other possibilities here as well. So, but this is the app that I'm going to show you, like how it works now. Like what did I do in Xojo to kind of make this work? And again, admittedly, it's a very simple application, but I think it shows enough of how you build it, an app in Xojo and integrate it with NetSuite, that you can imagine maybe taking it to the next level. And instead of just showing products, maybe you're letting a customer log into the application and seeing their order status, or maybe even placing an order, who knows? But this is kind of the stepping stone to, I think, that type of functionality and building apps that provide that type of functionality.
Yeah, and
So,
once you know how to connect and do these operations with products, well, you can apply that to literally any other table that NetSuite
mhm.
provides.
Yeah, so, again, it's kind of going off script, so to speak. I don't really have a script, but like, what I'm showing you here is really just, it's kind of generic, admittedly. Like you could imagine that a customer could be using this to look up product information and check availability and get pricing and all that good stuff. But also imagine that maybe you're empowering a sales force that is, like a distributed sales team that's running around the countryside selling you whatever widgets you're selling. And maybe you've developed, an application, a mobile app for them that's customized, that maybe they're using it to check products, or maybe they're pulling up their contacts. And then taking it even a step further, imagine that, like, as far as the CRM part of it goes, they're using it to add prospects, opportunities, that sort of thing, or quotes even, right? So to me, that would be the next step. And if you understand how the integration part of this works and how Xojo kind of works under the hood, I think taking that next step is not, it's, there's more involved in it, but it's not like starting from scratch. So this is, I think this kind of sum it up. This is, I think, a good baseline app to start with. So, all right, so there's the app itself. Again, not much to it. And by the way, if I were to try to do a search for no criteria, I actually put this in there just so that I could just show, all the products that came back. And there's not a lot in this NetSuite instance. It's not great data, but you can see how fast the results came back. And with this version of the app, I could pull back up to 1,000 at a time. I'm not doing any sort of pagination or anything like that. It's pretty basic. So let me jump back over to the presentation. So that's the iOS app. So let me talk a little bit about NetSuite and like why I think if you're a Xojo developer, this is interesting. And if you're a NetSuite developer, it's interesting. Basically, well, why would I care about what you're about to show me? And I think it really all has to do with the opportunity that NetSuite presents and that Xojo unlocks potentially, right? So as of the last Suite World, they actually had a slide about this. There were more than 37,000 customers running on NetSuite, and a lot of those customers have multiple subsidiaries and things like that. So it really turns out there's 324,000 some organizations that are running on NetSuite, which is kind of mind-boggling. What I can tell you is that demand for the external apps that I described, whether they're mobile apps, maybe even desktop apps, or web applications that are tapping into NetSuite, that demand, what I'm seeing is that demand is growing. And I think it has to do a lot with kind of the changing licensing costs and the way that NetSuite's, changing their policies on what a user, like how we define a user and things like that. So businesses, I think, are looking for ways to save money. I think they're also looking for ways to provide access to the data that at this point kind of feels like it's locked up in NetSuite. So that could mean employees that want to access or need access to data, but they don't have a NetSuite account. It could be customers, partners that you want to provide the data to.
It
There
could
are
also
other
be, it could also be just a, a situation where an employee needs access to a very specific narrow bit of data that is organized and displayed in a certain way that's efficient for them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are, other ways to do this for sure. But yeah, I mean, imagine that you do have a large group of, a good example, I think, is customers, right? And you want to give them access to the data inside of NetSuite. There are ways to get them into NetSuite's own customer portal, but if you've ever played around with that, you know that it can be very limiting. And So like this is another way to kind of provide value to them, provide access to that data, and really give them an experience that I think is potentially, just ideal for them. So I've seen a lot of requests for that type of thing, customer portals, mobile apps that are designed for customers or sales reps, where they want to have the customers be able to do things like look up their order statuses, get real-time access to inventory information, get tracking numbers, all that good stuff. So there's a huge opportunity here. And I don't think that very many NetSuite developers are really looking at that. I think they're really, at this point, it's mostly just, well, let's just keep doing the same old thing inside of NetSuite, and that's fine. But there's this whole other world, other, huge opportunity that's there. And with Xojo, I think it makes it easy for us to build those solutions that those customers are looking for. All right, so a little bit about Xojo. It's a low-code cross-platform application development tool. It's kind of a mouthful, but Jeff, I think that it's all the adjectives
Yeah, yeah.
that kind of
Yes.
define it. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Is how I would sum it up. You can use it to develop all kinds of apps, desktop apps that run on Mac OS, Windows, and Linux, mobile apps that run on iOS and Android, web apps, console apps, which you can think of as sort of apps that run from the command line. And it supports, because of the Linux support for it, you can develop apps that run on the Raspberry Pi, which is really kind of neat. I never thought I'd be interested in something like that, but now I'm not only interested in it, but I'm actively developing apps that run on the Raspberry Pi. Xojo is its development model, I think, is very intuitive. The other thing about Xojo is that it's the name of the company, it's the name of the programming language, and it's the name of the IDE. So when we say Xojo, it could mean many things, basically means everything. One of the things I find amazing about it, and there's a lot, is that I think the licensing plan for Xojo is just, I've used the word generous before. Um, you could download Xojo as a trial, basically. And it's not even the right word for it, but you can download Xojo today at no cost, start developing apps with it, and run them in what we call debug mode, and run those forever, until like your computer breaks down or the operating system's not supported, or I don't know, but you only really need a license when you get to a point where you want to compile and distribute the application. And even then, you've got options. If you are only developing for mobile, then there's a license for that. If you want to develop for web, there's one for that. One for desktop, there's one for that. And then there's a pro plan that covers all those. And and there's another plan as well. Jeff, I'll let you talk about it if you want. But um, again, there's no risk in trying this. And I think that once you start playing around with it a little bit, experimenting, hopefully you'll get hooked like I did, and hopefully be very successful in developing apps like this. So, and the company's been around for a long time. Jeff, how long has it been now?
27 years.
It's wild. So I think so few people are aware of what Xojo is, and it kills me. Sometimes I'm sure it does you too, Jeff. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
like, how does, but it's the best kept secret, or my secret weapon that I try to talk a lot about. So it's a secret that I try not to, like, it's not a secret. I wish that more people know about it. I guess
Well,
is a
no,
good way to
and I
put it.
appreciate that, Tim, because we do have users who are very careful to not talk about what tool they use because they see Xojo as a secret weapon and they don't want their competitors to know about it.
Yeah. The
Which,
way I look at that is, and people ask me, like, why, like, if it is your secret weapon, or if it's like, why are you promoting it so much? I don't work for Xojo. I'm not getting paid to do this.
right.
Um, the reason that I do this is that I think the more people that we can bring into the Xojo community, especially from the NetSuite world, it's one of those things where rising tide lifts all ships, or whatever that saying is. Like it would be great to be able to collaborate with other NetSuite developers that are using Xojo or other Xojo developers that are developing for NetSuite. I think that the community as a whole, both communities would benefit by having more people aware of the possibilities here. So that's why I do it. So a little bit about that demo that I just showed. It's using SweetTalk REST to integrate with NetSuite, and I'm using token-based authentication. I obviously had already set all that up on the NetSuite side, but when I provide the project file, I'll provide instructions to show how you can set that up in your NetSuite instance if you want to do so. And it's using a SweetQL query to retrieve the data. So I'll show you that in just a minute. And on my end, I'm running, this is running on a MacBook Pro from 2021, not the latest version of Mac OS. Not a ton of memory in it, but more than enough for what I'm doing here. I'm using the latest version of Xojo, 2023 R4, and I've got Xcode installed. The only reason I really have it installed at this point is for the simulator. And I'm running 13.4, which I think is behind. And on the NetSuite side of things, it's released 2023.2, and it's an instance that has multiple subsidiaries and multiple locations. So what happened here? There we go. All right, so the second demo that I want to show is actually, I want to show you what that query looks like that I'm running to get the data. And I'm going to show it to you in Sweet Browser. And that's something I've been blogging about, writing about a little bit on LinkedIn. Sweet Browser is essentially a browser that is, it's one that I'm developing and custom built for use with NetSuite. It sounds crazy, and I'll point you to the blog post so you can read about it. But I'm going to show you that query inside of Sweet Browser in just a minute. As a matter of fact, let me show that to you now. So I'm going to start Sweet Browser. 1 second. You guys can see that, right? Jeff, can you still see my screen?
Yep.
So this is actually the first time I've ever publicly demoed Sweet Browser. So if it's ever going to crash, this will be the time it'll do it. It's actually compiled for macOS, so you're seeing it actually running for real as a native macOS application. And for the most part, I think at this point, it looks just like any other browser. As a matter of fact, kind of plain Jane browser, right? There's nothing amazing about it in terms of how it looks, but it's fully functional. So as you can see, it's asking me to log into NetSuite, so I'm going to do that. Log me in. And there's the NetSuite dashboard. And if I pull up, let's say I can actually go into the current version of the SweetQL query tool, you'll see it launch. I've got it designed right now so that everything I click opens in a new tab. So that was fun to develop. It supports multiple windows, multiple tabs in each window. And it really works. As a matter of fact, if you run some queries, let's see. Yeah, this is probably going to fail because I don't think I have any test.com email addresses in there. Bear with me for a second. All right, let me reload. Like I said, if it's going to give me issues, this will be the time it'll do it.
Right.
I'm not sure what it's doing here. There it goes. I'm getting some responses back. But anyway, I mean, for those of you who are familiar with NetSuite and familiar with the query tool, you can see it really works almost exactly like if you were running this inside of, say, Chrome or Safari or what have you. But one of the reasons I wanted to show this to you is that the new version of the SweetQL query tool that I've been working on is built right into Sweet Browser, and you can get to it by selecting it from the developer menu. And this is what it looks like. So this is the new version of the SweetQL query tool. I'm going to load a script, a query. And this is actually the query that the iOS app was using. This is very similar to what it looks like. And if I run it, see the response comes back very quickly. So it brought back
Very cool.
49 rows in 1.3 seconds. And if I were to run the query again, I think it's probably hashed on that NetSuite side. You see the performance just gets better and better.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm showing you all this is not only to kind of show off Sweet Browser, but Sweet Browser is developed with Xojo. So it's insane to me that I'm able to use this one tool to develop all those other apps that I described to you, mobile, desktop, all that good stuff. And I'm using it to develop a browser. So I guess that just shows you just what it's capable of. I mean, you can do all kind of crazy stuff with Xojo.
It's a great
So,
example of, we think of browsers as being very general tools, but this is the great example of a custom tool that is, or custom application designed around a browser where you've added functionality, separate windows. It really feels like a desktop application,
mhm.
even though actually a big portion of it's being delivered over the internet, through the browser.
Yeah, it makes my head hurt sometimes thinking about like what I'm doing here. But what you're seeing, Sweet Browser itself is a native desktop application. It runs on Mac OS and Windows right now. I'm hoping to get it to work on Linux. I haven't tried that yet. Um, but yeah, it's basically a desktop app. And when you look at it in terms of just as a browser, yeah, everything that's being delivered here is, basically web views. But then, like Jeff, like you said, if I go into some of these other tools, and I'll get back into the query tool, this is actually functionality that's native. It's part of the native desktop app. So this, what you're seeing here, isn't being delivered over the web.
Right.
And I'm doing some crazy stuff here to make it work, like, to kind of like tap into that NetSuite instance. I have a blog post about a lot of this stuff, and I'll provide the link to that in the end. But yeah, I mean, basically everything you're seeing in the SweetQL query tool at this point is native. So
It's
it's
a great
pretty
example
wild.
of a hybrid app.
Yeah, that's really what it is, And so the line for me between what's native and what's web and where that hybrid sort of seam is shifting constantly. It's pretty wild. So. All right, so that's the query tool. And again, here's the query. I just want to talk real quick about what the query is doing. So you can see that I'm pulling from the item table. Let's kind of start down here. Pulling from the item table, and I'm pulling inventory items. I know it's probably hard to read some of that. The color coding is weird, but inventory items only active items. I'm filtering out ones where there's no display name because that's just weird. And then I'm using the regular expression like regexp like condition to basically kind of simulate full text searching. And I'm searching in this case only against the display name. It's kind of hard to see in there, but I have an asterisk so that I'm just basically like in this particular example, I'm just saying just give me everything. But if I had put in like, I think it was bike that we had searched for, I'll just get back items where the display name includes bike. And I have a recent blog post about like what that function is and like why it's important. But basically it uses, regular expression to make the search, the like part of this case insensitive. So even though I put bike in there in capital B, I don't have to worry about the case sensitivity of the keyword that was entered. So as far as the rest of the query goes, it's pretty straightforward. There's a subquery here where I'm getting the quantity available. And this was kind of interesting because I mentioned earlier that this is a multi-subsidiary, multi-location instance, and I wanted to pull only the quantity available that's truly available. So it's searching for or returning back the total available less any that are committed. So just a formality there, but basically it tries to give you a more accurate quantity available value. And then as far as the unit price goes, I'm actually tapping down into the item price table which if you're familiar with NetSuite, depending on how you've got it configured, there's different pricing levels, and I'm pulling back the first column max price of our base price rather, and formatting it as currency. So I don't even have to worry about formatting the amount that comes back. I can just show it in the app and don't have to worry about any of that. So that's the query. And again, I wanted to show that, as part of the tool, and just sort of again drive home the fact that with Xojo, you can build crazy stuff like your own browser. I'm not saying that on like day 1 or day 2 or day 30 even of you being a Xojo developer that you'd be able to do this. But maybe, I don't know, like took me a while to figure all this out. But
all the tools are there if you need them.
yeah, exactly.
Like the HTML viewer that displays the page there.
Yeah, and maybe at some point I'll do a webinar on like how this works, because it is kind of interesting, like how I'm, if I go back to the home page and jump between that and like another, let me pull up an inventory item, like how I'm handling the tabs. The tabs were surprisingly, well, maybe not, I don't know. For me, I thought, oh, that's how hard can that be? It turns out that managing the tabs is pretty difficult. It has nothing to do with Xojo. It just
Logic.
intellectually, yeah, like just architecting this was
Yeah.
like, so yeah, it's kind of crazy. So that's Sweet Browser. So I'm gonna quit. All right. So again, you saw the query uses that regexp like condition. Talked about how the quantity available gets calculated, the base price, and the category that it pulls back. It's using the items class and that built-in df function that we use in SweetQL. And so here again is Sweet Browser. Just kind of talk a little bit about what that does. There's the link to the blog post about it. I'm hoping to start testing that privately in a few weeks. And if all goes well with the testing, then I'm hoping to actually release Sweet Browser sometime later in the quarter. So we'll see. It does a lot of crazy stuff. And if you read that blog post, you can kind of see where my head is at as far as like why I'm doing this, because it seems like probably one of the craziest things I've ever taken on. Who develops their own web browser and why?
Yeah.
I kind of explain it in the blog post. So. All right, so the third demo, I want to show you exactly how the web app was built. So let me jump back over to Xojo, just stop the app, and just sort of step through this a little bit. If you were on the Android webinar, even the screens I think are going to look very familiar to you. So this is the Xojo IDE. I have the project navigator on the left, and you can see there's the app object up there. I've got some constants in here, and there's things like the account number, the consumer key that I used for the tokens and all that good stuff. I won't go through all of them, obviously. But that's where I define the credentials that we're using to do the integration. I don't really have to say too much about the iPhone layout or iPad layout, but you can specify some things about those. I'm not going to go into that right now. This is really meant entirely for iPhone and in portrait mode. So there's a launch screen that I think launches so fast that we don't really see it. Let me run it again. Maybe we can see it. But the launch screen is what you see right before that first screen loads. And I don't know if you saw it. It's there for a very brief second.
Of a second.
Yeah. There's not much for it to do. It just loads the screen. But I thought it would be nice to kind of show what that's like, and I got the Xojo logo on it. This is where things get interesting. The list view, if you want to think of it that way, this particular screen. So this is what you're seeing when it launches. There are some constants, or a constant really, and that's where I'm putting the query that you saw over in Sweet Browser. This is that SweetQL query. The only thing that's different is that where I had the star in the query that I showed in the browser, I have this token for the keyword. And the reason I put all this in a constant is that this is a good way for us to put multi-line text values into a Xojo app. It also just prevents it from me messing with it, but But this is identical to what you saw over in Sweet Browser, again, with that one exception of the keyword. So that's the query. And as far as the controls go on the app, there's the go button, which you saw me clicking to actually run the query. When I click it, it generates a pressed event, which I feel like I'm probably going to go really quick here. But what that basically does is when the person clicks the button, it runs this method called send API request. And if I go down here into the methods for that view, there's the send API request. I'll talk about that in just a minute, like what that's doing. As far as the other controls go, there's the field itself, the keyword field where I'm typing in the criteria. And there's a message box that'll come up if no results are found. So I've got one of those down here. I'll maybe when I launch it at some point, I'll deliberately run a query to show you how the message box comes up. There's a progress wheel which runs when the query is executing and we're waiting to get the results back. And then there's the table itself where the results are presented. And I'm going to go back through some of this stuff in just a minute, but when you click on a row in the table, it triggers a selection changed event. And I'll talk about what that's doing in just a moment too. But the guts of this thing, and it's the same thing I said in the Android webinar, what really makes this thing work is this, I call it NS connection, and it's a custom class that I developed. It's actually part of the app itself. Here it is down here. And it's based off of Xojo's own URL connection class. And basically what I'm doing in that class is just trying to make it as easy as possible for us to use URL connection to send requests to NetSuite, whether you're sending them to SweetTalk or to a RESTlet or what have you. You just tell it your credentials, and it's only supports token based at this point, but you tell it what your credentials are and what you want to run, like maybe what payload you want to send to NetSuite, and then it will give you back the response. So this is like if there's any magic that's happening in this app, like this is where it is. It basically handles everything from like signing the request and all that good stuff to sending it. And then as you'll see in just a minute, like once you get the response back from NetSuite, it's a matter of just doing something with it. So let me go back and kind of explain all that stuff I just said, because I feel like I went pretty quickly. But we enter some value into the field here and click the button. And again, when we click the go button, it runs the send API request method. The send API request does a couple things. First, it removes all the rows that were already in the table, if there are any. So we just blow away anything we were showing in the table when the person clicks the go button. Then I make the progress wheel visible because it's hidden up until that point. I'm also making the go button invisible and making the keyword field read only. And the reason I do that is while we're waiting to get the results back, I don't want the user to change the keywords. I don't want them to double click the button or do anything crazy. So I'm just basically locking the UI at that point. And then by default, I set the keyword to an asterisk, which again, if you don't put any criteria into that field, it'll bring back everything. And then you could change that behavior if you wanted to. You could actually maybe even pop up an alert saying, hey, you've got to enter some keywords. I can't do a search for nothing. But in my case, I decided to just bring everything back. And you can see where I'm also saying that if there is text in the keyword field, well, then let's use that. So if the person did enter something like bike or whatever, let's search for that. Then I put together basically what I do is I pull in that query that I showed you up here, which was, again, that constant. I'm loading that into a variable. And again, that happens here. And I'm replacing some stuff. I replace all the tabs that are in there and the end of lines, because otherwise NetSuite can get weird about having all that stuff, especially if you're using SweetTalk, which is what I'm doing in this case. So I strip away a lot of white space. And then I replace the keyword, that token that you saw in the constant, I replace it with whatever we're really searching for. So at this point, I've got my query built up as a string. And then this stuff here that you're seeing, all these NS connection one properties that I'm setting, these are where I'm telling that class, we're about to send a request to NetSuite. Here's the account number. Here's all the credentials. In this case, because we're running a query, it's a post request for the method. You can see where I'm specifying the URL and I'm using the account number to build the URL. And we're using the SuiteQL or the query service that SuiteTalk provides. Here's that payload that we just built up, or the query as part of the payload. I can specify how long I want to wait before we time out, and then I send the request. So at that point, when the user has clicked the button, we send the request off to NetSuite, and we're just waiting to get something back. So when the query response comes back, it comes back to my instance of NS connection that I have on the list view, and it triggers the content received event. If for some reason something went off the rails and there was an error, it'll actually show you an error message and kind of restore the state of the UI. So maybe NetSuite's down, or maybe your internet connection's down, or whatever, but this is how you could handle that error.
Hey, Tim, does Edwin's asking, does SuiteQL support prepared statements just to avoid SQL injection attacks?
I wish it did. At this point, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, like the fact that I'm using that token, the reason I'm using the token and not like a query parameter is that SuiteTalk's SuiteQL support doesn't support, that's a mouthful. It doesn't support query parameters.
Wow.
So yeah, there is some degree of trust that's happening there. But I should also mention, for those of you who aren't familiar with NetSuite and SuiteQL, that SuiteQL is read-only. So
Oh,
while you could do some query injections and do some squirrely stuff in there, minimal damage, I suppose. And also just
like,
remember that we're using NetSuite's own sort of native security behind the scenes. And so like the token that I'm using for this app is really designed for very minimal, like read-only on items for the most part. So there's not a lot of damage that somebody could do.
and
Think,
you could decide, Tim, to make a little method that you pass your value, your query through, or the
mhm.
values rather, and check it against, a set of SQL commands, for example. And if any of them show up, return true.
Yeah, a good example would be like if we, I don't know, like if you see like a single quote or something, just some character that you wouldn't expect to see in the keywords, you could
Right.
either strip them out or stop the query.
Yeah,
Um,
Edwin was also asking, he says, I read somewhere that storing secret API keys hard-coded could be found by hackers. Instead, store them, elsewhere. And yeah, I think for the purposes of a demonstration app, you have them in constants, but if you're
yeah,
really security conscious, you could encrypt that data and store it in a separate file and, things like that.
yeah,
But
it's a good question and a good comment. I think as just trying to keep things simple here, but the demo, yeah, I'm definitely doing things I probably wouldn't do in production like this.
yeah.
I wouldn't be using SweetTalk either, but I'll talk about that later.
And
And that
you mentioned read only. Is there a way to update data?
not through SweetQL, but with SweetTalk, there are ways to do that. If
Okay.
you would have to go in and set the roll up and all that good stuff. You still couldn't do it with the SweetQL query that you're seeing me use here today. So even if that role had the ability to like edit items, you still couldn't use SweetQL to do it. It's read only. So
Which is
too bad
probably why they're not in a huge hurry to do prepared statements.
or anything like that. We can't do prepared statements. I can't do views. Can't put my own indexes on things. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm just happy that I can get a select going because that's been a game changer.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I won't go into what you have to do to kind of get data out, but queries are the way to go. So,
Jim is
but
asking the error event for URL connection. How do you deal with an error from NetSuite itself?
So what you could do, and I'm not doing it here, but you would get content received no matter what, and you do get the HTTP status back in this event. I'm assuming that this is going to work, but I probably should have code in here that checks for other statuses. So if it's not a 200 response, that, maybe it's a 401 or something like that, where that's trying to tell you, hey, we got your request, but you're not authenticated. Like there's something failed with authentication or something along those lines.
But basically,
I'm not,
content received is where you'd handle that.
yeah, it's where you do it. And if if there's problems like that going on, yeah, it would be nice to show the user that. And as a matter of fact, when I show you like what I'm doing with this process API response, you can kind of see where I'm doing a little sort of like that. But basically, yeah, when content comes in, this kicks off and I pass the received content to this method. And you can see like what I'm doing here is I'm hiding the progress wheel, basically kind of getting the UI back to where it was, hiding the progress wheel, making the go button visible again, turning off the read-only attribute on that field. And then I'm defining the encoding on the content that's coming back. I'm not going to go into all the reasons for having to do that, but basically, at that point, I've got the content and I can start to play with it. So SweetTalk REST always returns a JSON response, or it should. And so what I do here is I decode that, get it into an object. And then if for some reason there aren't items in the response, then I know something went wrong. I probably should have a more clear error message here, but basically this is me knowing that whatever came back isn't what we're expecting to see. So I show an error message, a message box, and then just sort of bail out. But at this point, we do have data, hopefully. And so I start to put the table together. I get the items, and then I check to see if there is an items attribute in the response. It should be an array, and there should be at least one item in it. If not, then I know that the query was good, but it didn't return any data. In other words, your keyword, it couldn't find anything based on your keyword. So here's the message that gets shown. And then what I do is I loop through the items that are displayed and I build the table. So without going too deep into the way that the table works, there's two values that I'm showing on the table by default. One is just the text value that you see at the top, and then there's this details that you saw at the bottom. And so that's what I'm doing here. So if I run it again, you'll see that there's the down here. I think it was. So the display name is shown at the top, and then there's the details at the bottom. And going back over to the Xojo app, again, there's the display name shown at the top, and then there's the detailed text that I'm putting together and showing underneath. And then the other thing that I'm doing, and I think this is an interesting technique, is that every cell on the table has this attribute you can use called the tag. And basically what I'm doing is you can store whatever you want in that tag within reason. And basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the item that came back in the array from the API response, converting it from JSON into a JSON encoded string and shoving that into the tag. And the reason that I do that is that when the user clicks on the row on the table, I have everything I need to show those details. Now, this is admittedly, like, because this is such a simple app, I can get away with this. But basically, when the user at that point clicks on the cell, if I go back over and click, then what happens is on the table, the selection has changed. And so what I do is there's a bunch of stuff here, but essentially what I'm doing is I grab the tag value out of that cell and I pass it to an instance of the detail view and then show the detail view. So that's where this other screen comes in. And you can see this screen is very basic. It's basically just an HTML viewer on it. I can get away with this because it's just a read-only app. kind of starts to blur the line between, is this uh, a native app and a hybrid app? It's probably a little of both, depending on how you're looking at it. But basically, again, the only control on this is an HTML viewer. And what happens is when the detail view opens, it calls this method called display the product details. And basically what I do is I unpack that JSON item and just build HTML to show what the details are. And then down here at the very bottom, you can see where I'm using a data URL. If you're not familiar with that, you can look it up, or I'll give you a link at some point. And so at that point, I have this big blob of HTML, and I just load it into the viewer. And that's how you end up seeing this. And I'm kind of cheating there, right? Like the other way to do it, if you go back to the Android demo or webinar, you saw where I kind of did the same thing, but I unpacked the data and I put it in different real fields. But for this, because it's a read-only app, I can just show it as HTML, and it's just a lot easier to deal with. It
And
also
it's
means that I,
also
okay,
good to show a couple different ways of doing it too, because there'll be different techniques for different use cases.
yeah, so one of the things I really like about using this approach is, number one, it's fast. Like once you get that query response back for the list view, you have everything you need to go from there to details. Um, but the other thing about it is with HTML, I can put, conditional code in here to say, like, I don't know if you remember, but that one item I looked up was a special order item. And so if it's not a special order item, you don't see that, like, for example, in this product. But if I go back, let's see, of course, NetSuite's going to be slow now. If I click on, I think it was is it the frame? Yeah, the frame's the special order item. And so, you can see where I could conditionally change the content that's displayed and do it very easily. Same with like showing the weight. If we don't know the weight of the product, then I don't even bother showing it. Um, so it's kind of an interesting approach.
And if
I
you don't
think.
want to, if you don't know HTML, you don't want to get into HTML, you could always just use, labels and the native controls.
Mhm.
They're built into Xojo, and just unpack the data and fill it into those controls and set them to read only or whatever.
Yep. And that's exactly what I did in the Android webinar. So two different approaches. And I think um, depending on what you're trying to do, what your app is, this may be something to look at. The other thing is this whole idea of like not having to make a second API call to get the details. It's only going to work if it, in certain cases. So I'll give you an example. Like when I pull the data back and I like basically, here's that query again. I'm getting the quantity available, and that I mentioned how I'm getting the column one, like I think it's quantity one base price. Um, like that's all I'm showing in this app. But if on the detail screen, I wanted to show the quantity breaks, I would have to make another API call up to do that, right? And so it would change this app. Not a lot, but basically what you'd end up with is on the detail view, you'd probably put another instance of the NS connection class and then make a call back up to NetSuite to say, here's the item ID. I need more information on this item. I need the pricing. Or maybe it's I need images or something along those lines. But that's how you would do it.
Very
Um,
cool.
that's it, right? I mean, granted, this is an extremely simple, I've used the word contrived example, but I think it kind of shows you just how easy it can be, depending on what you're doing. Um, if you were going to, as a matter of fact, I think, let me jump back over to the slides real quick. Um, if you were going to do things like support user being able to edit or add data, it would be very similar. The screens would actually have real fields on them and labels. And then when the person submits, you would make an API call. And if you're using SweetTalk, you can call it the way you need to add whatever it is you're adding. Um, But anyway, let me sort of roll through this. I know we're running out of time. So I hope the big takeaways from this today are that with Xojo, it's one tool, many development targets, just unlocks a world of opportunity for you, I think. If there's anything in these example projects that I've shared, I hope that you like take a look at the NS Connection class because that's really what unlocks the integration. And I've done all the hard work for you of like signing the requests, all that stuff. As I mentioned, that there's opportunities here, I think, obviously for NetSuite developers and even people who aren't necessarily developers, but are interested in developing apps. You know, Xojo is low code. So, you know, it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet with development and you know NetSuite. So have at it. And if you're a
Jim,
Xojo,
Jim Meyer's asking, do I need a NetSuite account? How much does it cost? Is there a free or low cost developer option?
that's a lot of good questions there. So unfortunately, there's no way to easily get a NetSuite developer account. It's not like other platforms that we're used to, like maybe ServiceNow or Salesforce. And I've talked about that a lot in different podcasts and stuff like that, that it's frustrating. It's kind of like a walled garden, really tough to break into. As far as being a Xojo developer and getting into the platform, you can buy NetSuite, you can get a license for it. I don't know the pricing. I don't get involved in that, but it's not cheap. I do know that. My advice for Xojo developers looking to break into NetSuite is to try to find a NetSuite consulting firm or partner that is interested in developing these kinds of apps and then partner with them. Ask for an opportunity. Ask to get access to what we call a sandbox account, and then experiment. But yeah, it's frustrating. Once you're inside of NetSuite, you're good, but getting in is difficult. It makes like, I don't know, it makes like Apple's walled garden look like it's just walk on in. It's frustrating.
Tim, can you if a Xojo developer, for example, found a NetSuite customer, someone already using NetSuite, and they just need an app built, is that a
Mhm.
way in?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, for them, it's the customer, the NetSuite customer would need to give you access to their account. And, you know, at that point, there's a lot of resources online to kind of explain, like, you know, maybe how to get started with using SweetTalk, which is the integration technology I'm using in this app. There's also plenty of stuff on my blog about and other resources online about like other ways to do the integration. But I'm hoping that if you did have access to NetSuite, and I'm again with the project file I'll provide, you know, with this, I show you how to get SweetTalk going. And so hopefully, you know, it's enough to kind of get you on the right step, right path. And you know, if you have questions or anything, let me know. There are also Slack teams around for NetSuite that aren't just developers, but where you could get support and guidance. So, yeah, might be another good blog post at some point, Jeff.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's that. A whole lot of things I didn't cover. Again, I didn't show what would happen if you had an instance where the results came back and there were more than 1,000 search results. I didn't show pagination. I didn't show things like, well, it's always in portrait mode. What if they change the orientation? And as we talked about, basically what I've shown you is a read-only app. I'm using basically it's OAuth 1, it's token-based authentication, but you can do OAuth 2. And that again could be another blog post or a webinar in the future that obviously gets a little more complicated. And I didn't talk anything about, well, great, you've got this iOS app. What do you do with it once you've built it? How do you deploy it? That's a whole other topic as well.
And going
So,
back to device orientation, for you NetSuite developers, you can lock a screen to landscape or portrait so that
mhm,
if they rotate it, it won't try to reorient itself. If that's, if you're
yeah,
not going to, if it doesn't make sense in that mode, you can do that. Yeah. And
yeah,
I'm showing where that is. So you can
yeah,
make
you
it
would,
only work in one mode.
right. Let's see. Things to consider. I mentioned several times, I'm not a huge fan of SweetTalk REST, and I could talk for hours about why. The nice thing about SweetTalk REST is that it's just a matter of turning it on. It's available in every account. But as a NetSuite developer, I really want more control over the integration. And so I use RESTlets a lot. I have a solution called suiteapi.com, which is open source, and it's a RESTlet. And that's really what I use for all of my projects. But I'm showing SweetTalk REST because I'm hoping it's just like a stepping stone for you guys. Another thing is that we have the app hitting NetSuite directly, right? Like I'm going straight to SweetTalk. And so I would recommend looking at putting something in between the mobile app and SweetTalk, some middleware. And I won't go into all the details of that, but it takes some of the potential risk out of like going direct to NetSuite. So again, a much bigger conversation. And then
You can build that middleware as a Xojo web app. That's a great
you
way to do
could,
it.
yep. And basically then send the request to the Xojo web app and then have it sort of forward them on to NetSuite directly. And there's things you could do in that middleware layer, maybe some extra level of security and all that good stuff, versioning and stuff like that. And then again, like you saw me with this app, it's kind of a hybrid between a native app and like a hybrid app where it's using a web view for that detail view. Wherever possible, I try to use web technologies because it's just faster for me, but it's going to depend on what you're trying to do. So, and then next steps, download Xojo and try it. I can't stress that enough. No risk, just do it. And the Xojo project will make available as part of a blog post probably in the next 24 hours. And we're going to have another webinar, the third in the series. It's this one again, the next one rather, will cover web apps, and that's February 22nd at 1 p.m. Central. You can sign up for it already. There's the link to it. We'll be promoting that going forward. And Jeff, were there any other questions?
No, we answered all the questions as we went along, so it doesn't sound like we've got any more questions.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks everybody for attending. I hope that it was helpful. And if you have any questions at all, let us know. You can feel free to email me or ping me on LinkedIn. There's also really great forums for the Xojo community. And hopefully I'll see you on the next webinar. But I really hope that you've gotten something out of this and would love to see other NetSuite developers using Xojo, and I'd love to find some Xojo developers doing NetSuite work. Nothing would make me happier. And I think Jeff, you'd be pretty happy.
Oh yeah,
too.
and from what I hear from Tim, there is, there's just so much opportunity for NetSuite, for building applications for NetSuite, so definitely if you're a consultant and you're looking for work or more opportunities, talk to Tim, he can help you find your way into the NetSuite community because he's well known in that community. So definitely reach out to Tim.
Yeah, I guess, just a final comment on that. There's more opportunity than any one person, I think, at this point can handle. And so, it's again 37,000 companies running on NetSuite. A lot of them are looking for these kinds of solutions. A lot of them are looking for more advanced things than what I showed here today. But again, hopefully this kind of gets you going. So there's a lot of demand for mobile, a lot of demand for web, believe it or not, and then also desktop, especially in situations where like a manufacturing business that's looking for an app that they can provide to their shop floor, for example. And Xojo's a great way to build that kind of thing for them. So
indeed.
Yeah. So thanks, Jeff. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next month for the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye.